but given what we're seeing in the global, what is being called the New World Order.
Carney coming out with some new announcements here today. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today, Carney announcing his military industrial strategy, which is just really a way to help enrich his buddies. We got some other stuff going on here today. Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we got Shreya Teese modeling out what a snap election would look like. And well, what we see, 159 for the Liberals and 139 seats for the Conservatives. The Bloc at 31 and the NDP just shy of official party status with 11 seats. What the heck is wrong with people living in large cities? They claim to be highly educated, but they keep voting for continued destruction. There, that comment just, that sums up the last many years, the last 10 years of Canada. Moving ahead, we've got Mark Carney announcing his industrial military complex plan.
Our national security and our economic security go hand in hand. To those ends, as the Minister mentioned, we are announcing Canada's first ever defence industrial strategy. It's a bold plan to get our armed forces what they need when they need it. It's a bold plan to scale Canadian defence companies and to put hundreds of billions of dollars into strategic sectors of our economy while creating over 125,000 high-paying jobs across Canada.
And right away, Juno News calling him out here, says Canada launches its first defence industrial strategy, but the Defence Investment Agency, a new Crown corporation, is under scrutiny. The recipient of its first contract faces fraud allegations, and the 680K CEO's conflict disclosures are still unresolved. Good job on Juno News here. I think they should break this down a bit because I think the average Canadian wouldn't know what they're talking about here. So the first one, the fraud charges, fraud allegations, is this. Telesat sued by creditors alleging fraudulent asset transfers. Creditors have been trying to engage with Telesat for years in an effort to address upcoming debt maturities. The lender cited the company's move to shuffle its Lightspeed unit, a network of low Earth orbit satellites, to an indirect subsidiary and out of a collateral package backing its bonds and loans, according to a court filing dated Wednesday. So this is just back from last month that this article came out. The lawsuit alleges Telesat has taken no action to address billions of dollars of maturing loans, though the creditors have attempted to engage in discussions. Basically, they moved 62%, says right there, of the equity of its Lightspeed unit into an indirect subsidiary of the parent company where the creditors couldn't go after it if they don't pay their bills. This is so dirty. And is it just a coincidence that this guy is good friends with Mark Carney? This is Dan Goldberg. Mark Carney and him met each other during their kids' soccer games back years ago, and now they're good buddies. You can see here, December 9th, 2025, just a couple months ago, Carney and his government shuffled over millions of dollars to none other than Telesat Corporation. The government of Canada selected Telesat and MDA Space, etc., blah, blah, blah. This is just nepotism. Carney supporting his buddies once again. That's just the first part. The second here, 680K CEO's conflict disclosures. That's talking about none other than Mark Carney's buddy over here, Doug Guzman, former RBC guy, Harvard guy, Goldman Sachs guy. Carney brought him in at 680K, which is way more than Mark Carney's making as the chief executive officer of the Defense Investment Agency. So that's what we're talking about here today, his announcement. This is Doug Guzman. This guy knows nothing about military procurement. He's an RBC guy. And as Juno News pointing out, conflict disclosures are still unresolved. What are his conflicts of interest? Shrug your shoulders. It's the same thing as Tim Hodgson. But don't worry, it gets worse, a lot worse.
Its framework is simple. Build, partner, buy. First, we will build in Canada and prioritize Canadian companies. As a matter of policy, military procurement in areas where we have sovereign capabilities will be directed to Canadian firms first. Where we can't build alone, we will partner with like-minded allies, helping to attract investment, transfer intellectual property, and integrate supply chains so that public dollars flow back to Canada and Canadian jobs created right here. And only after exhausting those first two options will we buy from abroad. Even then, we will ensure the maximum benefits are returned to Canada throughout the value chain, including through a modernized industrial and technological benefits regime. The centerpiece of our new approach is the Defense Investment Agency, or DIA. The DIA will streamline and speed procurement. It will cut red tape, and it will expand domestic production. It has three fundamental objectives. First, to protect Canada's sovereignty particularly in the Arctic. Secondly, the DIA will work to build Canadian prosperity. And thirdly, we'll work to strengthen Canada's strategic autonomy, which means our ability to act independently in a more dangerous world.
He just had to throw that in there. It's just so dangerous and scary. Gotta tell Canadians that. Now, we've also got another clip here. Juno News posting this. PM Carney unveils his plan to modernize the armed forces and deepen alliances as cyber, Arctic, and drone threats intensify. Plan includes $180 billion in procurement, $290 billion in security infrastructure, and billions more towards NATO commitments over the next decade.
Have been completely upended. And in Canada, we are confronted with many variables. And for instance, we have the opportunities in our Arctic, but we also have the attacks in our cyberspace. And so the nature of warfare is changing because of the proliferation of drones and autonomous weapon systems as well. This is our purpose. So danger is closer to our borders, and this is a more divided world.
This is so ridiculous to hear his dangerous and divided world with this French translator here. I've never heard this guy before. It's so sad because he's actually tricking Canadians with this stuff, this dangerous and divided world. He's just going to keep saying this until he gets a majority government. It's just sick.
Through the strength of our values, but also the value of our strength. And this strength.
They talk about slogans. That's all this guy is. It's the same crap over and over. A poke in the eye of Donald Trump. Lots of mentions of EU allies, zero mentions of the USA. But Trump wants him re-elected. Why? He wants Carney to finish destroying Canada so the US can pick up the pieces. I mean, that's what I've been saying. This might be the case here. But Trump just came out and said he wants to start negotiating immediately after the whole Gordie Howe Bridge thing. And what does Carney do? Sends down 370 people, business leaders, Dominic LeBlanc to Mexico. This is all a big clown show here where Canadians are the one taking the brunt of this.
% NATO target by this spring, a full decade ahead of the previous schedule. Recruitment to the Canadian Armed Forces is up by 13% since June. We've signed a series of new defense and security partnerships with allies who share our interests, who share our values and our history. And that includes the landmark SAFE agreement with the EU that the Minister of National Defense, still have your pen, that he signed with the European Union last week. We have committed to double our defense expenditures by the end of this decade. And that amounts to an additional $80 billion over the next 5 years. In addition, as part of our NATO commitments, we will invest an additional $45 billion per year on domestic resilience, yielding both security and economic benefits.
So what he's doing here is he's finding a way to use military spending to boost Brookfield profits, no doubt. Brookfield procurement, grants, contracts, all that stuff. This is not just for the safety of the country. We know what he's doing here. As he announces projects, this will reveal itself. Now, something he mentioned in there is trusted partners. Well, who is one of the trusted partners? Within his long press conference here, he did name drop a company. Just listen for it. It's CAE. That's the name of the company.
The obvious example, we're in the middle of it. Quebec and Canada have proven strengths in aircraft engines, parts, simulation. With CAE, we are the world leader in training and simulation. You are the world leaders in training and simulation. Bravo.
So the very company he just name dropped is the one that he's doing the press conference from. This is CAE. They do flight training simulation, and they are a world leader in this. So if we go on CAE's website, and you probably already know where this is going. So you can see civil aviation, defense, and security. And well, let's just go take a look at the board of directors, management team. And what do we get? Well, we get a list of people here. Now, the person we want to focus in on here is actually the top dog. That's this guy here, Calvin Robinskew, executive chairman from Toronto, Ontario, the board of directors of CAE. CAE. Now, who is Calvin Rovenskew? You can see right there. Brookfield Asset Management appoints Calvin Rovenskew as senior advisor. Of course they did. This is Mark Carney helping another buddy. As senior advisor, Mr. Rovenskew will actively support Brookfield's private equity group and Brookfield more broadly in sourcing it and executing on attractive global investment opportunities with a particular focus on aviation aerospace sectors. As being the executive director of CAE, implementing operations-oriented value creation, blah, blah, blah. This was done back in March 22nd, 2021, just a couple of years ago. This guy came into Brookfield just after Mark Carney. We can look at the timeline. So Mark Carney joined Brookfield as vice chair in August 2020, so just the year before him. This guy comes in as a board member, senior advisor to Brookfield, which I've got Calvin right here. So he's a senior advisor for Brookfield. He's also executive director at CAE, but that's not all. He's also a board member at Scotiabank. You see here, director since November 1st, 2020, member of Corporate Governance Committee Chair and Human Capital Compensation Committee. This guy is just like all the rest, Doug Guzman, Mark Carney, all of them. On Wikipedia here, it says he serves on the board of directors for BCE, which is a subsidiary of Bell Canada. As it mentions here, Canada's largest telecom. We've also got Bank of Nova Scotia, Brookfield, and Teneo, Global Public Affairs Advisory to CEOs. He also served on the board of directors for the Business Council of Canada. Now, what's particularly alarming about this, not just the direct connections, this guy sits on the board of CAE, Mark Carney announcing this at CAE, but CAE's direct connection to the Chinese Communist Party, the government of China, Xi Jinping, which I have laid out right here. So CAE, Canadian company specializing in simulation modeling, training facilities for global civil aviation defense sectors. It's been operating in China for roughly 40 years. CAE's regional business focuses heavily on civil aviation, where it sells multi-million-dollar full flight simulators to state-owned manufacturers like COMAC and operates pilot training academies with major Chinese airlines. And that's what I've got broken down here. These are all the different airlines in China. We've got China Southern Airlines, China Eastern Airlines, Hainan Airlines Holding. We've got Guangdong Aerocity Holdings Co. We've got COMAC, which is a commercial aircraft corporation of China. We've got Air China. We've got China Eastern Airlines, which is different than the other one. This is SEFTC, and this one up here is CAE. We've got Pacific China Aero Technology Limited and CAA regulatory approvals and spare depots. So this is where their business lies and all these different things. And we'll start with spare depots there. So this is to service more than 80 CAE built simulators operating in China. CAE has opened two major spare depots. One is in Zhonghai and the second is in Pengdong Airport Free Trade Zone in Shanghai. And you can see what I have next to it here, independent, and this other one here that's independent is Pacific China Aero Technology Limited. In 2013, CAE signed exclusive agreement to provide business jet training, Gulfstream, etc. for Chinese flight crews. This is also independent of the CCP, but you can see all the other ones here with the red, and then there's one with the yellow here. These are the ones tied to the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping, that's why it's sitting right next to China, because these guys are doing big business with China. As we've got with the CAAC regulatory approvals, this is a full CCP ownership company. China Eastern Airlines is a CCP agency. COMAC is fully owned by the CCP. Guangdong Aerospace Holdings is also owned by the CCP. This is provincial ownership. And then the other ones here, Southern China Airlines, Eastern China Airlines, these have majority CCP ownership. These break down something like 64%, 52%. Same thing with Air China. The CCP has majority ownership. They get full control over all of this. I can show you the examples here right off of CAE's website, Civil Aviation. CAE Chongqing Flight Training. CAE partners with Eastern China Airlines for cadet training. CAE signs contracts with Atid Airways and China Eastern valued at more than $230 million for 9 full flight simulators. Canada CAE forms joint venture with Guangdong Aerospace for flight simulators. Is it a coincidence this is what comes up first after Carney's trip to China? This company so heavily tied to China. Calvin being an executive director for CAE, also a senior advisor at Brookfield. They put this loud and proud on their website, didn't they? All a little too convenient here. The nepotism here is unbelievable. Carney giving contracts to all his close friends, executives, buddies, all this kind of stuff. Does Carney know this guy? You bet he does, because he'd be sitting at the same board table as Carney for years at Brookfield. Now, whether they have a personal relationship out of Brookfield before all of this, who knows? But these guys definitely know each other from Brookfield. And the real problem with this, when you have all these decisions being made for Canada that just enriches businesses, it's not what's best for Canada. This is the equivalent of having a big banquet dinner and the company serving up what they have leftovers they want to get rid of, what's best for them versus what would be most enjoyable, most delicious, or most wanted by the people attending the banquet. Canadians are getting served up a dish that they don't necessarily want. They don't realize that they're getting leftovers that's most beneficial to the company and not to them. What we're getting served up by Mark Carney here isn't the healthiest meal for Canadians. It's what's most beneficial to Carney's well-connected buddies.
Well, this hour, Canada's Prime Minister announced a defense strategy, and it's seen as a response to a stronger commitment to NATO and in response to annexation threats coming from the U.S. president. Now, in part of what we heard, the large, broad strokes of it, is that the strategy would mean more built in Canada with federal defense contracts, more money being put into defense-related research and development in Canada, and an increase in defense exports, and to raise the serviceability rates of Canada's largely outdated military equipment. For more on all of this, we want to dig deeper into it with Peter MacKay. He is, of course, a former Minister of National Defence in the Harper government and also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs. You know, we've certainly been looking at these increased commitments coming from Canada over the past few years when it comes to defence spending. Do you think that this meets the mark, meets the moment when it comes to what we're contending with on the global scale?
Well, the short answer is if it's true and if the money is there. It's a very aspirational, ambitious plan, but I would add audacity in terms of the sheer numbers and the magnitude of the impact that they are projecting. And so I know that, and I speak to many members of the armed forces and those in the defense community, and they so want this to be true, as do I. But the big question that's missing in all of it is, how do we pay for it? It's either massive cuts to current government programs and spending expenditures, or we're going to suddenly generate huge revenues, and the only way to do that would probably be energy and minerals or other exports, or we're going to borrow more money, and keeping in mind that we're already in a huge deficit.
That's it right there. Borrow more money. Carney doesn't care if he's bankrupting, destroying our country, ruining lives. They don't care. The Liberals do not care. We're not going to get some big windfall. They're not going to get a new pipeline going. This is just going to be more borrowing.
It's challenging to figure out how this could happen in the time frame that's laid out in this strategy. But it certainly says the right things. It mouths the right words around buying more defense products from Canadian companies and working to ensure that we are in a position someday in the future to start exporting defense material. But that's a very competitive place for Canada to be.
And, you know, certainly that is often the question when it comes to announcements by government, and that is, how does this go forward? And to the end of where funds may be reallocated from, do you think that at this stage would be a worthwhile reallocation? And keeping in mind, of course, that we do not know where it might be coming from. But given what we're seeing in the global, you know, what is being called the New World Order, so to speak. So
this is unbelievable. They're putting this crap on CBC, the New World Order, parroting Carney's words.
In that, would it be a worthwhile reallocation, knowing that we don't entirely are certain of where it's coming from?
Well, Arthi, the answer is somewhat political, but it's to say that we have to measure the threat assessment, the challenge, and prioritize. Where would the money go? Are they on Arctic expenditures? Will we finally get fighter aircraft that have been promised for years? Will we proceed with perhaps expanding our maritime capability? We're building ships already on both coasts and in Quebec. And the technology threat that the Prime Minister spoke of with respect to cyber and space, all of these lead to eye-watering numbers. And yet, again, I come back to the financial considerations. There's also just the geopolitics of all of this. And the Prime Minister was walking a very fine line today, not to mention the Americans, but sort of they were conspicuously absent throughout the speech. And yet one of the big issues to try to square is how China, who were deemed the biggest security threat by the Prime Minister himself just a few months ago, is now being viewed as a strategic partner. And so all of those different contexts and the geopolitics make it a very, very difficult task for the Prime Minister to justify this type of spending while at the same time not laying out how the economy is going to be able to float these type of investments.
The irony of him mentioning that and you just seeing all those connections with CAE and China, Mark Carney and Brookfield, Canadians are getting duped and they don't even know it.